3 years, hasn't it? Well, as you can see, I'm now at the Hogwarts. I'm now moved to London. My dad became the government in America, in the magical world. I get to go home. And I moved to London in the magical world. This is Yandere Chan. She's a transfer student what goes to Japan Tokyo University in the magical world. She's gone here she is gone here for a few years at Hogwarts in the university area of Hogwarts. She just cooked me up a fucking pizza pretty much. Come on, Yandere. Got it? Good girl. Well, I guess I'll see her when I'm out on top. You know, I'll see her when I'm up top. Let's eat first. Let's go this way, actually. Yeah. I'll see you when I'm on. Okay, now. Like I said, I'll see her when I from the top. See ya for now. Tell them how old you are, Yandere Chan. 28 years old. Goddamn right. And who is your father? He is the king of the Nether. Yep. The Nether dimension. Watch YouTube.
Have you ever lost someone you loved? Someone who was such an important part of your life that losing them ripped everything out of you and left you as nothing but an empty husk? I have. Grief does things to a person.
My brother? Yeah. He decided to stay at the foundation. Don't ask me why, but yeah, he decided to, you know.
And the scars will never heal. Not really. Suddenly the world seems like a darker place. You wish you'd had more time, and you cling to the memories of what time you did have. You wish that you could go back and have just one more minute with them. Just one. That's all you want. That was all I wanted. Abigail Swan believed that the world was a magical place. She'd been obsessed with mystery, and seemed so certain that if she looked hard enough, she could pull back the veil and see the things that humanity was never meant to see. When I first asked her out, I did so before Halloween, and our first date was during the local ghost walk. Seeing how excited she was as we followed the group from place to place, and listened to the horrific tales of pain and suffering that haunted our lonely city streets, only made me fall deeper in love with her. She had the most wonderful, mischievous grin that made her dark eyes sparkle, and that night led to many others. Abandoned cabins, deserted theme parks, quiet forests. We visited them all together as we grew from a cute high school couple into young lovers, planning our future together. As time went by, we talked about marriage, mortgages, and even children. She wanted to get married in an abandoned church. Abigail was a force of nature, an unstoppable person who saw magic and beauty everywhere she went.
And my sisters and her friend, they are at school. Back at school in the magical world. Well, I moved to London because I really want to go to Hogwarts. And now, here I am at fucking Hogwarts, yo. Gang gang, you heard. Put on my wings again. Gang gang. Put off my wings. Put the shorts back on. Put this back on. Press play again.
Me see it too. Maybe if
See?
I'd taken a different route that day.
Tell them why you don't have to wear a uniform. Because I'm not actually from this school. I'm just a transfer student. Yeah, goddamn right. That's why you don't have to wear the school uniform. You wear your uniform from your school in the magical world. Yep. Press play.
I'd still have her with me. Some local kids decided to mix booze in Daddy's fast car. They ran a red light, and they hit me on the passenger side before I could even react. The boys were fine. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and Abigail, she didn't even make it that far. The months after her death were the hardest. My body might have healed, but it was the only thing that did. I felt her absence in every waking moment. I pored over her old photographs as mutual friends offered me empty condolences. I knew they meant well, but their support didn't change what I'd lost. They didn't cushion the pain that I felt. Nothing really could. I would have given anything to undo what had been done, or to even have one more minute with Abigail. Anything. That's why I did it. It's why I played the mall game. I didn't know if it would work, and I knew that in the unlikely event that it did, I'd probably end up killing myself in the process. But given the state I was in, and what it promised, I couldn't say no. Like I said before, grief does things to a person. It sends them to dark places, and in those places, there are often other things waiting. I first heard about the mall game through Abigail. It's not a well-known ritual. I never heard of anyone who completed it successfully, but with all the details out there, someone must have. Those who attempted it usually failed to even start it correctly, although if you dig deep, you might find some rumors of people who tried to play it and disappeared. Supposedly, if you manage to beat the mall game, you'll be allowed access to another world. In there, you would have your choice of prizes: worldly possessions, riches, knowledge, and if you choose, an opportunity to speak to the dead. The catch is, you can only... And if you were to beat the mall game, you can never, ever play it again. You have one chance to play, and one chance to win. In order to even play the game, you must have recently lost someone close to you, otherwise it won't work. However, if you have, and you are still reeling from the grief, you need to visit any large indoor mall of your choosing. It doesn't matter where it is. It just needs to be a large indoor mall. A strip mall won't work. You need to enter first thing in the morning, and make sure that you are the very first one to set foot inside the mall that day. Then you need to approach the nearest kiosk and ask the person working there, "What time does the mall close today?" Their answer is very important. If they do anything other than smile at you and say, "Stay and find out," then you have failed. However, if they smile and they say those words, then the game begins. My city has a very large mall near the highway that I knew would serve my purposes perfectly. I made sure to be there bright and early on a weekday, when they might not be as busy in the morning. I thought it might be easier to be the first person inside that way. The mall opened at 10 in the morning, and when the doors were unlocked that day, I was inside before they'd even fully opened. The underpaid employee who I'd pushed past shot me a dirty look as I made a beeline for the nearest kiosk, a cell phone provider. Common sense told me that this wouldn't work. Even if the mall game was real, it was such a long shot that I'd actually trigger it. But if it was, if I had a chance to speak to Abigail one last time, I needed to take it. I needed to see her again. The kiosk sat just ahead of me, and the employee there looked over at me as I drew closer. They probably thought I was there to browse or buy. There was no way they'd have expected the question I asked. "Excuse me, "What time does the mall close?" Their initial expression was one of surprise, and I felt my heart sink. I was so sure I'd failed at the first step. And then I saw their smile. Their eyes met mine, their gaze both knowing and mocking. "Stay and find out," they replied. Their tone was almost condescending. Those 4
Well, you
words
failed.
sent a chill through me. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd actually heard them correctly. The kiosk employee chuckled and turned away from me, leaving me standing dumbfounded by their counter. Finally, I pulled away, as I realized that it had worked. I'd successfully begun the mall game. That knowledge filled me with both elation and a quiet dread. Elation because for the first time, I felt just the slightest spark of hope. Dread because I knew what would come next. The mall game is fundamentally a game of tag. By beginning it, you invite something else into the mall with you. Just what exactly it is up for debate. Most people just call it the hunter. Some people said that the hunter would look like any other mall patron, and they'd be difficult to pick out from a crowd. There would be subtle things to distinguish them, but it was never specified exactly what those things might be. What is agreed upon is that once the mall game has begun, you cannot exit the mall at any time because the hunter will continue to follow you if you do. The only way to get rid of it is to win the game, which is easier said than done. In order to win, you need to remain within the mall until it closes. You cannot be caught, and you cannot leave. You must avoid the hunter until the hour before the mall closes, and then you begin the next step of the game. The mall I was in closed at 9. That left me with about 10 hours until the game was finished. I knew that the hunter would be entering soon, and I had every intention of avoiding it when it came. I figured that I'd try a pragmatic approach. Obviously, the hunter was going to come straight for me, so why not find a place where I'd be able to see it coming? Somewhere open and central. The food court, for instance. I could feel nervous palpitations in my chest as I headed there, keeping a distance from any other shoppers I saw. No one that I passed stuck out to me in any noticeable way. They were just average people going about their business. The food court was more or less empty when I got there. Some of the restaurants weren't even open yet. The few that were didn't interest me. I doubted I'd be able to hold down any food I ate. My stomach churned too much, and I hadn't had much of an appetite in the past few weeks anyways. I found a table where I could look out on the rest of the mall, and I waited, drumming my fingers impatiently on the table as I watched strangers pass by. I figured that anyone traveled, that the air around me felt a little colder than before. My eyes remained locked on the androgynous teenager who frowned before looking at their phone and jogging to catch up to their friends. I watched them for a moment longer before conceding that they weren't the hunter, although that new chill in the air made me uneasy. The room seemed darker than before, and I looked over to the other side of the food court, hoping to catch sight of any newcomers, before I noticed the old woman again. She weaved slowly through the tables as she approached me.
You know
Her
how to cook
serious
it,
eyes never left me.
Thank you.
And that
I was waiting for you to
intense
say that,
glare
Master.
made me feel uneasy.
Sorry. Okay.
She couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, and as she slowly came closer, I felt the room getting colder as the lights around me dimmed. Her very presence seemed to cast a shadow and suck all the warmth from the air around her. My every instinct told me to get up, but my body would not obey. As the old woman closed the distance between us, I could feel the world around me going dark, and in that dark, I saw her features begin to change. Where once an old woman had stood, now stood something else entirely. It lurched towards me, its skin clammy and gray, its eyes sunken and skeletal. And yet what was beneath that rotten skin was only barely human. I saw blistered lips curl into a grin as fresh pus dribbled from the sores. My nostrils were filled with an overwhelming stench of coppery blood as the hunter drew nearer. I'd foolishly come in believing that the mall game would be easy to play. I thought I could easily evade the hunter once it revealed itself to me. No doubt I hadn't been the first to think that. Running sounds simple in concept, but when faced with what hides behind the veil, your body doesn't respond. You sit there, like a deer in the headlights, watching it come for you, throat full of gnashing rotten teeth, and the stink of rotting flesh wafting from its threshing maw. I knew in that moment why others had gone missing. Either they hadn't seen the hunter coming, or they'd been paralyzed with fear when they saw it, just like I was. I sat in that seat in the food court, pulled into whatever cold darkness the hunter had brought with it as it advanced on me. I knew that when it took me, no one would even notice. I would be dismissed as another disappearance, and I would be forgotten. In what I was sure would be my final moments, I pictured Abigail and hoped that maybe I might see her on the other side. I imagined her mischievous smile and her sweet laugh, a laugh I would have done anything to hear again. Even that game, with the hunter only feet away from me, skeletal hands reaching for my throat to snatch me and drag me into its mouth. I found the strength to move. At last I screamed and launched myself backwards off the chair. As I put some distance between myself and the hunter, I saw the world around me get brighter. A few strangers noticed me and looked over in my direction, but I paid them no mind. As I stumbled away from the hunter, I saw that it seemed more human. The further I got, the more it looked like a harmless old lady. The effect was similar to those images you see sometimes when you move and the image changes into something else. Lenticular painting, I think it's called. Yet even with its harmless disguise back up, I still knew what that creature really was. I suppose, in a sense, my plan had worked. In fact, it had worked too well. I knew what was after me. I knew exactly what it was. And even once I turned to run, I could still smell the rotting flesh of the idiots who tried and failed to play the mall game before me. I must have looked like an idiot, taking off at top speed out of the food court and away from that harmless-looking old lady, but I didn't care. No one else would have seen what I'd seen, and if they did, God help them. I looked back only once as I left the food court, and I saw the old lady several feet behind me.
That bitch. Don't know fuck up, or if not, move on, dickhead. Keep on moving if you don't want to fuck up. Keep on moving. I'm done with warning you, mate. Press play.
She'd moved faster than I'd expected, but I'd still put some distance between us. I rushed up one of the nearby escalators to the second floor, where I was sure I'd be safe for the time being. From the second floor, I watched the old lady following me towards the escalator. She kept a steady pace, and her gaze was always fixated directly on me. I looked back at her before turning to leave. I didn't run, but I kept a brisk pace, intending not to let her catch up to me again.
And
the first hour was only barely done. I
gave birth to my two daughters, basically. They both turned, well, one of my daughters turned 7 years old today. And my other daughter turns 4 years old today. So, yeah. Sorry I didn't tell you when we met at the foundation at the start. No. Yeah. Sorry I didn't. You know what I mean, shit. Press play again.
9 more to go. Part of me considered heading for the door of the mall, catching the bus, and heading home. But the warnings I'd read had been clear. Leaving the mall at any time would not get rid of the hunter. The game would end, and the hunter would continue to pursue me until it inevitably got me. No, to leave would be to die. Plain and simple. Judging by what I'd seen behind that harmless old lady to the escalator that led down towards the food court. When I felt a familiar drop in the temperature around me, I paused and looked backwards, expecting to see the hunter behind me. But there was no one. The lights around me were starting to dim again, and I remained frozen, unsure of what was close to me. Was there something else nearby?
Or a new
A second hunter, perhaps?
Or an old one.
The descriptions I'd read hadn't said anything about that. And then from the corner of my eye, I saw her. I'm not sure when she got down to the lower level, or when she'd caught up to me. But there she was. That same little old lady riding the escalator up to me. Her eyes were fixated on me, like they always were. And I could see something shifting behind her human facade. I recoiled on instinct away from the escalator, and I broke into a run, putting some more distance between us. Not too much this time, though. I didn't want to lose track of her again. I watched as she reached the top of the escalator and resumed her steady pursuit of me. I could hear my blood pounding in my ears, and I could have sworn I saw a wry smile on her lips. Suddenly, I wasn't very thirsty anymore. Over the next few hours, I kept moving. Whenever I got tired or wanted to stop, she was there. I learned very quickly that if I got too far ahead of her, she'd find a way to get close to me again.
Cool, done.
About 5 hours into the game,
Let's go there.
I saw her come out of a store in front of me when I was sure she'd been behind me. Not long after, I saw her coming straight for me when, again, I'd last seen her 20 feet behind me. As the day went on, she became more and more aggressive. The mall itself began to feel...
What is it? Come on, bring your fellas. Let's go catch the train and yeah. Let's take this uniform off. Put this over here, yo. Put this over here, put my wings back on. I'll see you when I'm at the New London City. Here we are in New London in the magical world. Yep. Gang gang. Look at this place. Let's go to somewhere. And fuck somewhere. Done. Senpai Daddy Master. Good girl, Yendo-chan. Gang gang. Let's go fucking chill somewhere. Do you have a house here? Yeah, I do. Cool. Gang gang, you heard. Look at this place. Let's go fuck at the park here. At the city park. Done, girl. I know. Press play.
Oh, you're not.
Looking at our character for a second. As you can see, that sit down mod doesn't work on this map, unfortunately. So I have to do what Minecraft, does best, is do this pretty much, without having mods. So yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work on this map. It works on some maps, but not all maps, unfortunately. So, we have to deal with this, unfortunately, what I'm doing right now. But, it's whatever. 3, 2, 1, action.
I promised her. I played the mall game and I won. I get to see you again. I saw her eyes widen for a moment. Disbelief, fear, and finally excitement crossed her face and culminated in that smile I loved so dearly. That smile made everything worth it. You actually played the mall game? She asked. Oh my God, you dumbass. You really did, didn't you? I really did, I said. I had to see you one more time. I had to say goodbye. She caressed my cheek, her smile fading slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I could see the tears welling up before she kissed me one last time. We talked. For one last time, she and I sat at the place where we began, and we talked. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was enough for me. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry. I told her that I didn't know what I'd do without her, and as I spoke, as I cried, she held me close. You're gonna be okay, she promised me. Death is scary, but it's peaceful too. I'm okay. You don't need to worry about me. So just worry about you. Alright, Mikey? She brushed my hair from my eyes. I know it's gonna be hard, but when you get back up there, keep going. You've still got a life to live. Don't waste it. I'll be down here when you're done. I promise. I almost laughed at that. She giggled a little bit too. I just don't think my life will ever be the same without you, I said. She shrugged. Who says that's a bad thing? Look, I know we didn't get to do everything we wanted to while I was up there, but that doesn't mean you should give up on it. It's okay if you need some time, but when you're ready, find someone. You deserve to be happy, Mikey, and I don't want you lingering on me. Like I said, I'll be here, and when we see each other again, I want to hear all about the things you did. Go out and live your life. Do it for me. Her cold hand closed over mine. I squeezed it affectionately. All right, I promised. When I'm ready, I will. She kissed my cheek as she wrapped her other arm around me, and we cuddled close as our time ran out. In the distance, a clock chimed, and I looked up. Our hour had passed, and we both knew it. Abigail let go of my hand and stood up. You should go. I'll see you soon, I guess. Hopefully not too soon. She forced a smile, and I did the same. Hopefully, I replied. Take care of yourself, okay? I always do. You too, Mikey. You too. She walked me to the stairwell. I gave her one last parting look, and she offered me a reassuring smile before she let go of my hand. Part of me wanted to beg her to come with me, but I knew it wasn't possible. There was no undoing what was done. All I could do was live with it. I began to ascend the stairs, tears still in my eyes. At the top, I found the first floor of the mall, not the library. I looked back down towards the stairs, only to see that they were gone. There was only a plain tile floor behind me. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I still found it in myself to smile. Whatever price I'd have to pay one day, it would be worth it. For that one moment I'd gotten. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was better than what I'd had. I returned to the department store, where the bed waited for me, and lay down once more. I wiped the tears away one last time, before I drifted in. The mall was opening for the next day. As the doors unlocked, I stepped out of them and looked up into a familiar blue sky. The cool air was crisp in my lungs as I walked away from the mall. My grief still felt heavy in my soul, but the burden felt...
This was just now.
I read my first no-sleep story when I was a freshman in college. I was in bed one evening, surfing the web, and I decided that I wanted to scare the shit out of myself. The internet is home to a lot of strange things, as I'm sure many of you know, and I found a few of them that night. But nothing piqued my interest more than this community. Reading all of your experiences over the years has been strangely cathartic, for I, too, have known horror. I've never been in a haunted house, or caught a glimpse of anything paranormal. I'm not even sure I believe in such things. But no demon or monster or vengeful spirit from the depths could tell me more than what I already know. Evil walks among us. I have more than glimpsed it. I have stared it in the face. So please, though I'm not as gifted a writer as many of you, indulge a loyal member of the No Sleep family. I've never posted here before, and I probably never will again. My life to this point has been unremarkable and unextraordinary in every way, save for one solitary tale.
That's what you're talking
Indeed,
about?
a perusing of my journal would reveal only this single blemish on a tapestry otherwise entirely full of good
I feel
days.
sorry for this guy.
But you, friends,
He
you should
doesn't
know better
what
than the rest.
evil is.
One bad day can deliver a lifetime of sleepless nights. When I was a kid, well, a young teenager, I frequently spent my Saturday nights babysitting my siblings. As the eldest of three, I assumed this responsibility with no pay nor thanks to speak of. It was simply expected of me. One of my contributions to the family. I babysat so frequently because, well, my parents needed it. They'd had marriage problems in the past, and their counselor told them they should go on a weekly date. You know, revive the magic, rekindle the flame, all that good stuff. Yeah, it sucked to be robbed of a weekend evening, but it wasn't much of a burden. My parents were happier than they'd been in ages, and they both seemed genuinely excited for date night each week. I would have rather been doing other things, of course, but I'd seen my aunt and uncle go through a nasty divorce a few years back, and I desperately wanted my parents to stick together. And so it was that on the night of December 3rd, in the year of 2006, I stood at the open front door of my secluded Colorado home, waving goodbye as my parents backed out of the icy driveway. "Drive safe," I called out, wrapping my arms around my torso in response to the wintry mountain air. I entertained myself for a few brief moments by exhaling forcefully and watching my breath float away into nothing. And there was truly nothing around me, not a car or a creature in sight. It wasn't long before I grew bored and turned back into the warm house, nose tingling from the chill. Georgie and Kate were eating their dinner at the kitchen table. As I watched them, I couldn't help feeling like an only child. Georgie, 3 years my junior, was severely autistic and about as talkative as a bag of bricks. He only spoke when he really wanted something, and only then in the simplest of words. "Milk and sandwich." was code for peanut butter and jelly with the crust cut off, which he was presently devouring. Kate, meanwhile, was still a beautiful bouncing baby, just shy of 2. The 9-year gap between them is glaring, but to this day, my parents swear to me Kate wasn't an accident. Kinda like back in high school, when I swore to them, I had no idea how those magazines got under my mattress. But I digress. The kids finished dinner, and I set them up with their entertainment for the night. Georgie in his room with the PlayStation 2, a hot commodity in those days, and Kate in her crib, in front of Sesame Street. Myself, I ignited the basement fireplace, dimmed the overheads, and curled up with a book by the light of our Christmas tree. God, that was a nice house. Not a day goes by that I don't miss it. I read in perfect contentment for nearly an hour. Night had fallen by then, and the room had become toasty. I was beginning to doze off when I heard Georgie's heavy footsteps descending the staircase. I sat upright
Do you
and
have a
looked at him
place here?
expectantly as he
Yeah,
waddled
I
into the
do.
room. "No more knocking," he said,
Cool.
brow furrowed in
It's
annoyance.
next to the old
shook my head.
abandoned
"I'm not knocking,"
middle
I
school
said. "Is someone
and
at the
high
door?"
school.
George just stared at me blankly.
Cool.
"Georgie," I
Oh
said,
no.
more clearly this time.
Another one.
"Did someone knock on the door?" "No more knocking," he repeated. "Knocking on window." I stood up, now wide awake. "Georgie, is someone knocking on your window?" "No more," he replied simply. I stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank, I thought, but being alone in a house that big makes you a little jumpy. My mind started to race through the situation. I was a 13-year-old boy in a nice house on the hilly outskirts of a Colorado mountain town. The streets were engulfed in trees, and there were no homes within a quarter of a mile. Our road saw next to no traffic, and the police station was a good 15 minutes away. It was probably my friends, I thought. But what if it wasn't? "Follow me," I told Georgie, hand trembling slightly. I turned the knob and glanced up the staircase. It was dark up there. The only light came from Kate's room. "Kate." I sprinted up the stairs to her room, where she remained happily perched in her crib, squawking with delight as Elmo fiddled with his crayons. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still, my heart thumped in my chest. This is silly, I told myself. Be a man. I made my way down the hall to Georgie's room and stood at the door. Taking a deep breath, I gently pushed the door ajar, reaching for the light switch and thinking better of it. If this was the worst case scenario, then I didn't want our mystery intruder to know where in the house I was. The only light in the room came from Star Wars Battlefront's game pause screen. I listened for a moment, but heard nothing. I began to suspect that Georgie had simply imagined the knocking. I moved to the window and flicked up a blind to reveal nothing. Just a landscape of freshly fallen snow, backed by a quiet, lonely road. I watched the peaceful night, relieved, as the large flakes fell softly to the ground, my eyes trailing an individual fractal all the way to the footprints just beneath the window's frame. At first, I didn't comprehend them. I just stared, transfixed, at the deep imprints in the snow. Shoes. A man's shoes. None of my friends wore the size of that, I felt sure. I traced them backwards from the window
on
to
your
the
first
sidewalk,
day.
from whence this intruder had evidently
You were
come.
asking me
But
if
where did they lead? It was
is
a
the
bright
cross
night. The moon shone
or some
proudly
shit like that. I
between
can't
the
remember.
clouds. My
But,
eyes followed the steps across
yeah,
the
you
front
know what
yard,
I mean.
but once they passed behind
There
the
you go,
giant
guys.
pine,
That's how we met.
they disappeared. My heart leapt to my throat. Whoever had walked behind that tree was still there. In panic, I quickly backed away from the window. Georgie, sensing my fear, began to whimper. At this point that I started to cry. I couldn't help it. I was scared. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that the storm had killed the phone line. But there wasn't much of a storm. The snow was steady, sure, but there wasn't even a breeze. Certainly nothing that could have disabled our phone. I walked into Kate's room and peeked out the window. My first glance was toward the tree, of course, where the footprints stopped. But now they continued. Sometime while I was herding my siblings downstairs, whoever was behind that...
After this episode of this documentary series of mine, I guess I'll see ya a month later, a week later, who the fuck knows. I'll see ya whenever the fuck I see ya, I guess, after when I fuck this hoe. So yeah, like I said before, after this series, after this episode, I'll see you in a month later, a week later, who knows really. So yeah. 3, 2, 1, action. Press play.
That tree
Off you.
had moved.
Too, baby.
I followed the footsteps across my frozen front yard to a man standing near the driveway. He was looking right at me. My breath stopped. I was frozen in place. This was not one of my friends. I'd never seen this man before. But he was looking at me with an eerie blankness. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black slacks, a lone dark spot on a blanket of purest white. My eyes never left him, and his never left me. We stood still, silently staring for what seemed like an eternity. My heart thumped in my chest, and I felt nauseous. For the first time, gazing into this man's eyes from afar, I began to consider the possibility of my death. I thought of my dad's brother, who was killed in an accident at age 11. Forever 11. Never growing up. Frozen in time, in the memories of all who knew him, as a soul of eternal youth. At this, the tears flowed freely once more. Please don't hurt us, I begged in a sobbing whisper. I knew he couldn't hear me, but I couldn't help myself. Finally, he broke eye contact with me and looked towards the heavens, toward the gently falling snow. He was saying something, but what I couldn't hear. I stared, transfixed, as he pulled a handful of dark powder from his pocket, and then, still gazing upward, still muttering to himself, he flung the stuff at his feet. I desperately wanted to run, to get my siblings, but I thought that to let this man out of my sight would be incredibly foolish. No, better to keep an eye on him. The house was still locked. I had the upper hand, I felt. Besides, I couldn't bring myself to look away from this strange ritual unfolding before me. The man had removed his sweater and flung it carelessly to the ground behind him. He was no longer staring skyward, but his lips continued to move. I trained my eyes intently upon his mouth, trying with no success to read his words, when I saw something glint in the moonlight from his other pocket. It bore dark stains already. From what? I covered my mouth to hush a scream as the man, still muttering to himself, ran the... A thin red line appeared along his abdomen, and blood of the deepest shade began to dribble from the wound. The streams trickled down his belly and fell ungracefully upon the black powder at his feet. At this, the man stared skyward once more, face contorted in a gruesome smile. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and mucus ran freely from his nostrils, but he looked happy, beyond happy, elated. My stomach churned in revulsion. This man was in ecstasy. I watched, almost entranced by this bizarre unfolding, when the man's face changed suddenly. He looked directly at me once more, and his eyes appeared unhinged. Still clutching the knife, he began to sprint directly at my window. I took one look at the weapon this man brandished, and I instinctively fled the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and was halfway down the stairs when I heard the window shatter. The man screamed in pain as I reached the basement. I locked the door behind me and ran to Georgie and Kate. "No more screaming," Georgie pleaded. No more screaming," I agreed in hushed tones, stroking his hair in an effort to calm him down. Kate, meanwhile, seemed happy as a clam. I strained, listening intently. Is he inside the house? I still clung to some naive hope that he'd injured himself on the glass and retreated, or perhaps he'd been weakened by his self-inflicted wound. And finally I heard it. The subtle but unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. He was indeed. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, listening to the ceiling creak above us. And then I realized, I don't know why it took me so long, that we weren't trapped. We still had a way out. I saw in my mind's eye a window well in the bathroom down the hall, the only access our basement had to the outside world. Almost as if on cue, a frustrated scream echoed from above, followed by a tremendous crash. He'd pulled something to the ground, perhaps the entertainment stand, or maybe the hutch. "He's here," the man shrieked hysterically. "How dare you hide from him?" To this day, I don't know who he was talking about, but it was at that moment, the moment I heard him begin to descend the stairs, that I made my move. Holding Kate in one arm and guiding Georgie with the other, we began our flight down the hallway. As we reached the bathroom, I stared fixedly at the window near the ceiling. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it. I flung the window open, stood on the toilet, and placed Kate gently in the shallow winter well. Then I stepped off and told Georgie to get on. "Yucky, gross. No standing on toilet," he said, looking embarrassed. I heard the man fumble with a locked handle at the base of the stairs. Time was running out. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it was the only way I could think of to get Georgie to cooperate. I smacked my brother roughly across the face, and I grabbed him by the shirt with both my hands. "Get on the toilet, Georgie," I snarled at him. He began to wail in pain and surprise, but he did step onto the toilet all the same. "Climb out the window," I directed in a harsh tone, and as he grabbed the ledge, I used all the strength I could muster to help push him up. Once, he almost slipped back down, but he was stronger than I thought he was, and he managed to pull himself back up. With both of my siblings safely in the window well, I climbed on the toilet one last time and gripped the edge of the windowsill. As I clambered out myself, I heard a crash. The man had broken down the basement door. With one last hoist, I pulled my legs up through the window and I shut it quietly behind me. As I helped my siblings out of the well, I heard one last anguished shout from the man, muffled through the pane of glass. "Why are you hiding from him?" "Cold," Georgie said as I led him barefoot through the snowy grass. In panic, I shushed him, but it was no use. He and Kate were both crying quite loudly by this point. My only hope was to get them as far away from the house as possible. I heard a distant crash from inside the house, and I quickened our pace. Feet numb, I sprinted through the yard to the sidewalk, and I practically had to drag Georgie onto it. "Bathroom light on," he said pleadingly. He was obsessive about turning off lights and electronics before leaving, and he was correct. We'd left the bathroom light on in our haste. I ignored him and rushed us down the frozen pavement, stepping on sharp rocks and sticks, and not even comprehending it. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't know what we were headed toward. All I knew is what we were headed away from. The snow was falling much harder by this point. I could already see it collecting in a pile on Kate's head. Her nose was beet red and dripping with snot. I needed to get her inside. But where? And I looked ahead and I saw a light off in the distance. The Garland's house. I'd said maybe a grand total of 6 words to Mr. and Mrs. Garland my entire life, but that was our only option. It was in their house that we would seek refuge. My house was now around the corner and out of sight, but I didn't let up the pace until Georgie tripped on something and landed in a dark puddle. He screamed, and in the glow of the distant street light, I could see that Georgie had fallen into blood. A dead man lay, face up and eyes open, on the sidewalk. Snow had fallen under most of him, and he'd been mostly invisible until Georgie's feet had connected with his midsection. I remembered the dark stain I'd seen on our intruder's knife. "Come on," I pled, pulling my eyes away from the grisly scene as I pulled Georgie to his feet. We ran for another 60 seconds maybe, and we finally reached the Garland's front door. The window into their parlor was open, and a fire was roaring. Mr. and Mrs. Garland sat, drinking tea, in cozy armchairs. I pounded ferociously on their door, and they answered together, utter bewilderment stamped on their faces. I handed Kate to Mrs. Garland, and I collapsed into tears. The police arrived at my home 15 minutes later and apprehended the man, unconscious, lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of our basement bathroom. They discovered him with a fractured skull, many deep lacerations from the window of Kate's room, and intestines partially protruding from the wound on his gut. He had slipped in his attempt to climb where we had climbed, hit his head, and knocked himself out. Apparently, he confessed under questioning that he was a member of a strange cult, a cult which, as far as anyone can tell, doesn't even exist. He claimed to have been taking part in a ritual which required the sacrifice of a pure soul, and my autistic brother had been his target that night. My parents had not shared with me all the details of what happened after that night, but as far as I know, our intruder is currently rotting in a cell. The man he killed, the man lying on the sidewalk, was a friend of my father who lived 2 streets over. He'd called his wife on his cell phone not long before he died, informing her of a suspicious man dressed in black, stalking around the neighborhood. My parents arrived home from their date to find police swarmed around the block and their home a crime scene. My father relocated at work, and we'd moved across the Rockies to Salt Lake City just 2 weeks later. Kate.
Which was this one now?
New Nurofen Meltlets, a quick, convenient pain relief that melts in your mouth. Only $28.99 at Chemist Warehouse.
Social media for a better world. We are 8. Download now.
I sighed as I saw the toll booth looming up in front of us. My wife and I had driven down this road 1,000 times in the 10 years we'd been married. It was actually the place we took our first date, and we loved to drive down it on Sundays and feel nostalgic. Despite the number of times we've driven the long and winding route, the toll booth always surprises me. It sounds weird to say that your first date was a drive, but I think it was pretty sweet. I'm a photographer. I've been since I was 19, and I often shoot weddings and family photos for people in the area. I've got a fantastic eye for locations, and my photos have been featured not just in people's living rooms, but also in magazines that debut the beauty of North Georgia and the Carolinas. The Appalachians have been my home since I was born, and I know how to bring out her beauty in my photos. I was 22 and on my way to a wedding, and was sitting on the hood, waving her hands at me, asking if I'd stop. I rolled down
Yes.
my window to see
Cool.
how I could help,
Here's
and I
your journalist
remember
now.
her relieved look to this day.
Keep this
She
rather
said her car
of
had
a
broken down
spare keep cup
and
of
was
notes.
wondering if I could
Thank
help her.
you. You're welcome.
I'm no mechanic, and my car knowledge stops at an
So
oil
do it now.
change.
Don't smoke.
So I offered her a ride to the wedding I was attending so she could call the wrecker. She agreed, and ended up hanging out with me for the whole wedding. The wrecker could get there for about 3 hours, and I was the only person she knew. So we talked between photo shoots. I got her some food. Weddings usually have a little extra, and this one was more of a country union than a black tie affair, and we sat around and chatted as I took candid shots. We discovered that we actually had a lot in common, and when the wrecker called her, she told him to just drop it off at her mechanic. I drove her home afterward, and invited her to dinner with me later that week. I know what you'll say. It wasn't a real date, but it meant something to us, and we've always considered it our first date. We even went back on our first anniversary and put a marker where her car had broken down. It may be a little macabre, but we put a wreath there to commemorate her little coupe that had died on that spot the day we met. We still keep it up, and we stop at it sometimes, so that we can remember how we came to know each other. The spot where her car died is about 2 miles from the toll booth. The toll booth is an oddity. It's just a random toll booth out in the middle of the woods. You'd put 50 cents into the basket. The booth is never manned, and head on your way. I have no idea who comes out to collect the change jar that sat in the cup holder, something to get us by till payday, and we'd forgotten to put some change back to pay the toll with. The drive was kind of our date night this weekend. We had a picnic in the back seat, and we were going to the lake where the wedding had been held on that long ago day. The lake was where we had our wedding, and we went there sometimes to picnic or swim, or just enjoy a quiet afternoon together. "What's the matter?" Carol asked. I dug a nickel out from between the seats and weighed the pathetic little pile of change. 5 pennies, 2 dimes, and a nickel were all I'd managed to find under the seats. The arm hung stoically across the road, little more than a wooden suggestion than a real barrier. I thought many times that I could probably just drive through it and be done with the insipid toll. But such things were a little too rebellious for me. You got any change?" I asked, doubting she did, but wanting to be sure. "Nope," she said, looking in her purse before exclaiming, "Aha," and dropping another nickel onto my palm. "Well, that's a little better, but not quite 50 cents. Just get some out of the change cup." I shook the cup at her, reminding her that we'd recently traded it in. "Oh." She looked contemplative. "Well, what shall we do, my dear?" I considered turning around, maybe just forgetting the whole thing, but a new idea bubbled to the surface. I pulled onto the soft shoulder of the road, the car protesting as much as my wife. I was sure that my car's wheels would bog down at any second. The shoulder of the road is soft turf and seed grass, and I expected that my tires would spew up earth and stick as I maneuvered around the barricade. I'd have to sheepishly explain to some highway patrolman how I'd gotten stuck. To my surprise, though, I drove easily around the barrier. I laughed, and I wondered why I simply hadn't done this before. "What are you doing?" my wife asked, half laughing but half aghast. "We've given this thing 50 cents loads of times. I think it can give us a pass just this once." We both laughed as we drove away from the lonely little toll booth, but I think even then, I felt a slight twinge on the back of my neck. I would remember it later and realize I'd been warned. We drove down the familiar road, taking in nature's bounty and chuckling at our daring. The trees were ablaze with early fall oranges and deep, healthy greens. The sky was a perfect robin's egg blue, and I just knew that the lake would be wonderful today. We could watch the sunset, maybe have a little fire before driving home, and snuggle in bed at the end of a perfect day. It was a good plan, but someone had a different one. As we drove, my wife watched the leaves with interest. My wife is an unofficial leave looker, though she'd never admit it. and our house has many pictures of beautiful foliage. As I drove, the road winding onward, I saw her lift her head from the car window and squint at the passing colors. We were both getting on in years, no spring chickens now, but the look she was giving those leaves was decidedly prudish. It was like an old maid who simply could not believe Miss Tyler let her daughter out in that skirt. "John," she asked, sounding perplexed, "does something seem off about the trees?" I looked at the trees, the oranges and reds and greens, looking completely natural to me, and I told her so. It does, but it doesn't. It's like seeing trees on TV, I guess. They look kind of glossy, recorded even. I don't know how to describe it. They just look a little weird. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was seeing things. It had been a long week. We'd been through a pretty stressful time, and it was enough to make anyone a little jangled. She kept watching the trees, but I'd put my eyes on the road again, wanting to be there already. We'd driven for about 30 minutes, though, when I had to slow down. Sitting in the road, white and brown with a glossy oak arm, was the toll booth. I stopped and looked around, thinking someone must be playing a little joke, but there was no one around. The toll booth looked exactly as it had before. It was simulated wood grain, and the walls were painted a dark brown and creamy white. The arm was a simulated oak with a glossy finish. It looked exactly like the toll booth, but it couldn't be. Could it? Maybe they thought they'd put up another one? My wife asked, smiling, but clearly confused. I laughed. They were getting a little greedy, weren't they? I pulled around this one too, watching it disappear in the rear-view mirror as we made our way down the road. My wife was still looking rapidly at the trees as we drove past, her attention becoming unhealthy. When she asked me to take a look, I glanced over to see the usual reds and oranges and greens, but something did seem a little off about them. Had they become even more vibrant? The foliage looked artificial, almost neon, and it battered against my eyes as I watched it go past. Okay, there's no way you can tell me that was just my imagination. I didn't answer her. I just wanted to get to the lake so we could have our picnic and all this would be normal again. This was weird, yes, but it was just a strange phenomenon. We would make it to the lake and everything would be okay. When we drove here next weekend, or the weekend after that, everything would be just as it was. I edged my speed up a little, wanting to get past these weird technicolor trees and into the deep woods I knew were coming. We'd driven for another half hour when my brakes screeched against the pavement. I blinked. It couldn't be. I'd been driving this road for 10 years, and it was always just the one toll booth. My wife seemed startled too, leaning forward to look unbelievingly at the little booth.
Fucking gives
It
you
looked
some
exactly like the other
chances
two, but that was
before
impossible.
you die. Maybe it's saying, look, you have to go, look, you have to go, look, you have to go before I kill you, look, you have to go, just go already. Maybe it's warning you to get out of the forest before you come to a horrible fate, human.
We'd passed it twice, and I was sure there was only one toll booth out here.
Much likely
There
there
would
is,
be
but
no
like I
reason
said,
to think a second one would make any difference. There was so little traffic out here. What the hell? My wife asked. And when I pulled around the arm this time, it was a little more aggressively than I'd meant it.
if I was you, human,
Maybe, she
I would
started,
get out of there.
pausing as she looked a little
'Cause
nervous.
it gives you many
Maybe we should just pay the toll.
leave,
I didn't say anything.
many get
I'd been
chances.
too mad to even acknowledge the prickle on the back of my neck this time. Stupid, money-grubbing jerks. They hadn't figured they could line their pockets enough with one toll booth, so they added two more? This was unbelievable. I had a sense of humor about the first one, but if they thought they were going to gouge me for another toll, babe, well, they had another thing coming. I was going to write my congressman, my senator, and the frickin' president if they thought they could, John, gouge people like this. What about tourism? What about local beauty spots? What the hell happened to bringing people in so they could, John? I stomped on the brakes and turned to yell, "What?" as she stared out the window. Normally, she would have chastised me for yelling at her. I don't think I'd yelled at her more than a couple of times our whole marriage, but she was too shaken to even take notice. She was looking out the window, staring at the trees with the strange leaves, and pointing with a shaky finger.
Ready? Yep, I'm ready. Cool. Let's do this over here. Done. Ready? Of course. Good girl. I know. Put your hair. I guess I'll see, like I said, a month later, who the fuck knows? Hey, get the fuck out of here. Go.